Jeff, I had to give up my tickets tonight, so I'm a dedicated city council.
You are.
Yeah.
Score. 0-0.
Don't, Jeff doesn't want to hear any updates, though, just for the record.
I'm hoping to watch it.
Just for the record. My class starts in January, and these are assignments already.
And we all know
I haven't even started. Jeez.
Tis time.
This, you went over these directors meeting, some recommendations, not that they have to be, it's recommendations for some changes within those areas or changing the names.
I changed the names on some of this stuff.
Yeah, so these are just suggestions by directors.
Thinking about,
I mean, that's the way it has to be. This is just a recommendation.
Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the City Council study session for December 10th. And the first order of business is roll call. Teresa?
Deputy Mayor Baggett.
Here.
Councilmember Brown.
Here.
Councilmember DeCoursey.
here.
Councilmember Holman.
Here.
Councilmember Pelosa.
Here.
Councilmember Trout Manuel.
Here.
Councilmember Wales.
Here.
I don't believe we have any announcements, reports, and presentations tonight, so we'll move into the agenda items. First item on the agenda is annexation of island areas. Any other directors want to show up down here?
Not enough?
Thank you. I'll go ahead and kick off on this one, talk about the legal process for annexation of island territories. As with other annexations, an annexation can be initiated by a resolution of the residents in the area to be annexed. But there's a particular provision in state law that for islands like we have here, where there's a piece of unincorporated county completely surrounded by city property, council can initiate the resolution process, the annexation process by resolution. This is some timelines involved in doing that. Council would need to state its intention to annex the island properties. We would then send notice not only to the individual property owners, we have to publish that notice, and we need to send notification to both, to the applicable county's boundary review board. After the resolution notice period, there's a public hearing, and if council decides to move forward with the annexation and pass an ordinance. After the ordinance is passed, there's a 45-day period required by law in which the affected property owners can petition for a referendum. We would have to put it on the ballot if they get the required number of signatures, and those specific numbers are in the memo that we presented to you. While the Boundary Review Board has jurisdiction over the annexation, it's not automatically invoked. We tell them that they have notice of it, but again, an affected property owner would have to go and ask the board to review our process. It's not 100% clear because there are different parts of the law. What happens if you have an annexation and referendum and the Boundary Review Board has jurisdiction and somebody invokes that jurisdiction, which one would have priority or which one would have to go first? But we cross that bridge if and when we ever come to it. So that's sort of the nuts and bolts of the legal process. I can answer some more questions in more detail about that. But the process itself is not. Oh, one more thing about the process is once the referendum is done, it has to be voted down by just more than 50% of the affected property owner. So 50% plus one property owner. And that's it from the legal part of this. The rest of it's all numbers and other good stuff. If you don't have any questions about the process.
Member Holman.
50% numerical or 50% property value?
Of the
properties,
affected
not the
area.
Not the property values, 50% of the properties.
Just education on my part, who is actually requesting or suggesting that we do this?
I did.
Yeah.
Any other questions regarding this item?
I was going to.
Councilmember Wales.
Yeah, if we're going to discuss this, I'd also like, there's some other areas that are possibly available for annexation that maybe, John, you can tell us about islands, or not islands, but peninsulas.
Yeah, in the same statute, there is a island and peninsula. So if it's bordered on 3 sides by the city, it is a peninsula and is handled under the same statute. There is one peninsula up in the Lakeland area. It's also within our annexation.
Potential annexation.
Yeah, PAA.
And UGA.
Pierce is UGA, right? King is PAA.
Yeah, just reading over the material in here, it just seems like we're gonna put a lot of financial pressure on the residents in that one with the clump area.
Did you want to go over the fiscal impact?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
The fiscal impacts, in a nutshell, would be for the totem area about $565 a year and $720 a year for the clump area. The city does levy a 6% B&O tax on the outside utilities like telephone, power, cable, and a 5% cable franchise fee. Those are on the businesses. However, the businesses traditionally pass those on through to the residents or the homeowner. Additionally, they would then both annex to the VRFA, and they would be subject to the fire benefit charge. Currently, the totem area is serviced by VRFA, and that's the one in the south, and they pay $1.50 per thousand. Annexing to the VRFA, they would pay about $1 per thousand plus the fire benefit charge. And then the capital cost to improve utility infrastructure, I saw that there would be a requirement to upgrade water and sewer if they were to connect to the city's utilities. And on page, I don't know what page it is of your packet, it would be page...
Those costs would be on the homeowner?
Page 6. Yes, is it on page 6? I don't have the page number for the fiscal, anyway. Okay.
Yes, page 6.
Okay, there we go. On page 6 of your packet, at the top of the page, the LAD cost for each parcel would be approximately, it says $8,700 a year. That should be $3,900 a year. I had a denominator error when I did the math. And then $2,100. The higher amount would be in the south. Clump, I get one confused. And then the
Totem is south and clump is north?
north, yes. And there's 24 parcels north and 54, my last count, in the south. Those are significant LID costs to go. And the reason we put that in, is because if we went in to do streets, and I'll let Director Gaub get into that a little bit more, that if we went in and took equipment in to do streets, we don't know where the water lines are in the south, Totems, thank you. It's a private water system. We have no idea where the water lines are. And if we went in and did road work, it would most likely crush those lines. So we would need to upgrade the water at the very least, and they're on septic on both ends. There's a few connected to water and sewer in the south. Up in the north, they're all connected to water, but everybody else is on septic.
Councilmember Wales.
Back a number of years ago, maybe 17 or 18 years ago, when we were in the process of annexing Lee Hill, we started with my neighborhood, and some of the promotional materials showed that garbage was going to be less and fire was going to be less. So there were some benefits to offset some of the increases. For the south and for the north, as it relates to Totem and Clump, are there any benefits, financial benefits for these two groups?
The one benefit, taking out the utility tax components, the Totem area would pay about $115 less in property tax because of just due to the levies from the city of Auburn. But the stormwater they pay the county versus the city's stormwater is a wash. It's just a few pennies difference. The impact, however, on the north, in the Clump area, we are in the Kent School District. And when we look at the levy rates and why the Clump pays more, is there's a $2.12 difference between the Kent and the Auburn School District levies. Kent is $2.12 less than Auburn. They stay in their own school districts, but that's why we see the differentiation. But there's not any sales tax generation that I know of out of the areas. So there's very little revenue. I think there's like $80,000 thereabouts revenue that would be coming into the city from property tax and the taxes on utilities.
No fire department difference?
Well, there is, but it's more because of the fire benefit charge. The Clump, they are part of the Puget Sound Fire District, and they pay, in this year, they are paying 77 cents per thousand.
Okay.
The VRFA currently is at 98 cents per thousand, plus the fire benefit charge. There's no fire benefit charge that I know of. There may be in Puget, I think there is in the Puget Sound, and I don't know if that is. And then the Totem in the south, they're under contract with, I believe, with the VRFA, and they pay $1.50, which is all collected by the VRFA, so they don't have to pay the fire benefit charge, which I calculated that on an 1,800 square foot single-family house without sprinklers, and the fire benefit charge is, and that would be about $293.
Councilmember DeCoursey, and then Councilmember Pelosa, then Councilmember Holman.
So the Totem water system's on a well, it's private. So if it's annexed by the city, what happens to that water system ownership? And are we responsible for maintaining it?
No, so the system would stay private if it were annexed to the city. The only way that would change is if they petitioned the city to go and do a local improvement district to expand water into that area and build that water system. Or because those roadways in the Totem location are in such bad condition, when we go to actually do the preservation of the roadway, we're most likely going to damage that water system because it is a very small and undersized system, as well as Shelley mentioned, we don't know where the lines are. They don't know where the lines are, so it's not been well maintained. So it's likely that we will have to do something at that point, but again, it would most likely be triggered as a local improvement district against those property owners, which is why you see in the report the costs for Totem being at about $48,000 for a local improvement district, and that's basically to do water and sewer for that whole area. The area is primarily septic, except for 2 parcels that are served by sewer. And so if they wanted sewer service from the city, that would also be another request through the local improvement district process. However, the cost for the roadway work would be something that our 103 local street fund would have to absorb.
Councilmember Pelosi.
I was trying to extrapolate out of this whole report the true benefits for the city annexing these two areas. So I'm looking at page 6, the second paragraph at the top, page 6. And the last line of the second paragraph, 78 parcels annually for a total of 82,000 in new revenue. Is that the total revenue that we would gain out of all this?
About that, yes. There were some estimates that
Doesn't
made.
seem to me that all this effort is worth that. I would like to see, Shelley, advantages, disadvantages for this annexation.
To the city?
Yeah,
Almost.
to the city,
Okay.
right. It's pretty hard to pull all that out of this report. You've got a lot of low numbers, some medium-sized numbers.
Well,
Councilmember Holman.
It's not all about dollars and cents, to be perfectly frank with you. Let's look at the north end, Clump, which I always thought was Thomas. That's
Yeah.
neither here nor there. Across Auburn Way North is the Robinson future development, Robinson Property Development Group property. That is going to, at some time, be a very large development within the city of Auburn. It is adjacent to unincorporated King County Island. As we have already learned from our experiences up on Lee Hill, unincorporated King County has different development rules and regulations than we do. Plus, we have no control over what happens in King County. We have a large parcel of, looks to be about 3 blocks by 12 blocks square, 2 rectangles, of unincorporated King County in the heart of Auburn, right next to a large development that's coming in. So we would have no voice about them putting in a business of that we wouldn't feel comfortable about in our community. How would you like to have a new go-go bar? Topless dancing, what have you? We have no control over that island right now. And as that develops up there, the Robinson property develops into a center, much like Lakeland is today, would you like to have unincorporated, it'll still be known as Auburn, and we have no control over what businesses, future businesses go in there, or what type of development. Let's put a 500-unit multi-family subsidized housing complex there. We have no control over it. Or let's put in luxury but is not affordable. Yeah, I would rather take in the lower fee that you said, that you pointed out, the dollars and cents, in order to gain zoning control over that area.
Councilmember Wales.
I think there's some merits to what Councilmember Holman is speaking to. So when you break out the plus and minuses, if you would do it by clump and separate clump from the other one, and I would be interested also, plus or minuses for the peninsula. And I really, what are the, if I may ask a second question, Ingrid, you're not Ingrid, but anyway, Ingrid, what are the conditions of the roads in the Clump area, the Thomas Clump area?
Clump area is in a better condition than the Totem area because we recently went in and replaced our water line. So Clump, we actually already serve water to that area. So we did a significant amount of pavement replacement when we did our water line replacement. So there's probably minimal impact to the 103 fund in the next few years for preservation of that roadway. I do want to point out that for both areas though, these are old county roads, so they're not the full cross-section that you would have for our roadways. So there's no curb gutters, sidewalks, street lighting, storm drainage in these areas, and those costs are not factored into the numbers that you have in the report before you.
How's it currently, the Thomas Clump one, how's it zoned?
So the zoning right now for Clump up north, which is what you see on the screen, is R4. That's a county residential zoning designation. And our city comprehensive plan, you know, when you adopt a comprehensive plan, you anticipate potential annexation. So the future land use plan for the comprehensive plan calls this area out as light industrial. So, of course, the council has the authority to go through a process of comp plan amendment, but assuming that comp plan designation remains in place, you would be looking at a light industrial zoning designation here. On the totem piece, it's also R4, residential, 4 units per acre, under the county designation, and the city's comp plan designation there is multifamily, which is 20 units per acre. So there'd be a potential zoning change. While I have the floor for a second, I think it's also important to know that in the north area in Clump, all of those 24 property owners their addresses would have to be changed. So they would all experience an address change. Right now, that's 85th Avenue South. We look at it as C Street Northeast. So something to know just in terms about reception from those affected. On the south end, it's 8 of the 54 properties that would have to have an address change. And then I think it's also important, this only applies in the north end, but the proposed FEMA maps that will go into effect, they've pushed the schedule a little bit further out. Now it's December of 2019. The memo says that it's spring of 2019. But sometime next year, those FEMA floodplain maps everything on the west side of 85th there is pretty much covered with floodplain, which I wrote in the memo, and I think it's important to just think about perception. If there's an annexation that occurs and then that map changes, there could be some folks out there that think that the annexation caused the development impact, because once you're in the floodplain, it's hard to develop. So we'd have if nothing else, we'd have an educational piece that we'd really have to be intentional about and figure out how to ensure the property owners know that it's not an annexation that's causing this. It's a federal FEMA floodplain map change, which is also going to affect the development viability on that north island as well.
Yeah, Jeff, I have a question relative to the Clump area. You talk about the current zoning is R4, did you say?
Yes,
That's
county
through
zoning.
King County, right?
County zoning is R4.
But our comp plan shows it as being light manufacturing.
Correct.
We have a little conflict of...
Not really, because what governs in that island is the county's comp plan map and the county's zoning map. So there's a consistency at the county. That city's designation within its comp plan is making sure that we're prepared as a city, if we go through an annexation process, to know what we want to do with it. So if it comes into the city, then we have to go through a process of changing the zoning from R4 to light industrial so that you don't have that conflict.
It could be gearing it up for development.
Right.
Rather than residential.
Right, and it's worth pointing out that the built environment there, in both locations, they're both fully built out with single-family homes, and that annexation and those changes in comp plan land use designations from residential to either industrial or multifamily will instantly make all of those properties non-conforming in use. And non-conforming is looked at a lot differently than a conforming permitted use in the zone. So those are all issues that are navigable. I think going down that path, there's a lot that needs to be thought out in terms of.
Well, I know that, we've got a public hearing coming up and everything on this issue, do we not? Is there going to be a public hearing on this?
Not unless we,
Decide to move forward, to move forward with one of the
I
others.
see. Kind of like to be interested to hearing what the people that live out there have to say about it. And Councilmember Williams.
2 questions. First, who provides police service in Clump?
Currently, King County has priority response to it. They're the reporting for that.
And second, not to argue with Councilmember Holman, but isn't it kind of not favorable for Roberts and Associates to try to do a multi-billion-dollar development next to something that's 2 blocks away that's kind of unknown? I mean, that's what John was alluding to. What is how realistic is that concern?
Concern for the city or concern for RPG? I doubt it's a concern for RPG.
Okay.
I mean, it really is, back to Councilmember Holman's comment, I think it really is one of the pros, if the list was developed, one of the pros for the city is you have more control to understand the future of an area.
Can I just take that little police thing a little further?
Go for it.
Oh, thank you. Some of the businesses up there are having some issues with police issues. And I think up there that they would appreciate the response time of the Auburn PD as opposed to what they may be getting. Businesses that are up there.
Councilmember DeCoursey.
So Shelley, the fiscal impact that you pointed out, the 565 and the 720, that does not include the cost of the LID?
No, it does
Okay,
not.
so we're looking at another $500 per year basically per parcel for the LID.
Well, more than that.
It also does not include the system development charge, so if we build the utilities in there and they connect, they'll have to pay the system development charge. And those are about, in 2018 numbers, a little over 11,000 for the water service connection and 5,600 for the sewer service connection. So
Can we get a total all-in cost estimate with all the,
If they were to convert then.
if they were to
yes.
convert and everything,
Sure.
just to give us some measurement of if it went all in, what that number would be?
Sure.
Councilmember Holman.
the operative word, though, is they're not forced to go onto the sewer. They're not forced to go into city water. The only way they could be forced to go onto city sewer is if their septic tank fails. And King County's health department failed their septic tank.
or they're within 200 feet of our sewer system, which some of these locations they would be, so they would be
You go up
required
on
to
Lee
connect.
Hill, which is now City of Auburn, and there's still a lot of septic tanks up there. And it's been incorporated now for 15 years, 16 years?
2008.
Any other questions? Councilmember Pelosi.
Y'all could, first of all, I want to tell John, you made some good comments on your first talk there, John. I'd like to refer you to page 14. And I'm looking at the fire benefit charge of Valley Regional Fire Authority.
Yes.
Why is the benefit charge showing annual income to the city of Auburn and not to,
What- If it's meaning
Annual charge if
if
they're
they're
within the city.
in the city. if they're in the city. I didn't break it out. It's annual dollars, meaning if they're in the city, if they're annexed to the city. The city won't get that, and that wasn't considered in the.
No, but it implies the city's gonna get that.
Well, it's in the city or out of the city. So we could look at it that way.
Or make a note or something.
Any other questions?
I just want to clarity. On page 6, where it's got, on the second paragraph, where it says 28,000 in B&O, I didn't know we had B&O.
The utility tax is considered a utility B&O tax.
Okay.
Okay.
It's just the.
I was a little surprised to see that myself. I didn't think we had any B&O tax.
Me
Well,
too.
It is actually, it's a utility B&O tax. It's a business and occupation tax on the utilities. Yeah.
Thank you.
Learned something new.
I always refer to it as the utility tax.
Steve?
Just to make sure staff has guidance, we had 3 requests for a pro-con statement. Is that the consensus of the council to sort of convert this into a pro and con chart? Heads nodding. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 heads nodding. There was also one request to include one peninsula area that we hadn't looked at before. That's going to take a little bit more time. But do most of y'all or all y'all want to see that?
That one's in Pierce County.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's Second Street.
We don't need it at
We
the
don't need
same
it?
time, but I would at some point in time like
Looks like it
to
is.
take a look.
One last
Robert's
question.
Rules
from-
of Order.
Pardon?
I need some clarification.
Yes.
According to the Rules of Procedure, is it a requirement that when we discuss topics potentially to be added to the matrix or for future feedback, that we have to have 4 council members or more in favor of that? And if so, where is that cited in the rules, our rules?
In your council rules, and I don't have my rules here, it should be, well, actually back in my office, but I'll get them. But your council rules specifically say that it takes a consensus of the council to put something on the matrix.
Okay.
So we can talk a little bit more about what consensus means, but generally it would mean you would all have to agree. But the other piece to your question, Councilmember Wales, is that individual council members don't have the authority to direct staff to do anything. You can request always, but if 4 or more of you direct staff to do something or request information, then that is the will of the council. That's why I always ask for, can I see 4 heads nodding?
Councilmember Wales.
So how's that different than voting?
It's an informal vote. Is your question, do we vote during study sessions?
Correct.
You don't you don't take final action on ordinances or resolutions during study sessions, but again, in order to give direction, the council acts as a body. And so at least a majority of you, in order to act like a body, at least a majority of you have to give some sort of affirmative indication that you want something done.
One of the reasons why I requested that we look at the peninsula is that I was going to further ask that Jeff maybe propose that if we were to take this on, a timeline to look at this. Because if you look at the issue that he shared with us earlier of possibly confusing the people up in Clump with if we did the annexation and did it at the same time as something else, that they would get confused. So that if they would propose a timeline, if we were to choose to do this, that would give us the best of their ideas. And if we're going to go to that work, we might as well look at the peninsula, and it may not be viable at all.
One other question from my standpoint is that have you heard anything from any of the people that live up there? at the Clump area?
We've had 2 general inquiries from property owners in Clump about what's the process look like if I own a piece of property and it's adjacent to the city to come into the city, but no formal applications, just informal conversation.
Councilmember Holman.
Another part of the process, each one of these has to be done individually. We can't do a broad, one at a time. We could do 1, 2, and 3 in the same evening, but the likelihood of us undertaking that much is probably remote. But I'm very satisfied with the pro and con list on clump and totem, with the understanding that we're very interested in the peninsula, but that can be in the future, near future, just to keep the workload reasonable.
Any other questions? Thank you, folks.
Oh, what did I call it? Oh, dang.
Next item is graffiti
Darren?
update.
You gotta splash that over here faster. What did I call it? Robert? Thank you. This thing didn't correct me, so it looked like, so you make me look like a schmuck.
Thank you, Mayor, Deputy Mayor, and council members for having us. We're here to talk with you about graffiti. My name, Officer April Steinman with the Auburn Police Department.
Chris Barrett with the Code Enforcement Department and the Planning Department.
So the difference between gang graffiti and non-gang graffiti. Gang graffiti is going to be very linear, very simple, very plain. It is used to convey messages, also for territoriality in certain areas, usually is singular in color. Whereas in non-gang graffiti will be more artsy, very bubbly. You'll see lots of colors. It's more of an artistic art form than the gang graffiti.
We have several different ways of recording and eliminating graffiti here in the city. Our reporting mechanisms, we have online forums, we have mobile forums for Android and Apple users. We also have the front counter that people come in and submit requests for graffiti removal. As far as recording goes, we generally take photos of all of our graffiti. We submit it over to the police department for analyzation and kind of some tracking to find out trends and things like that. And then as far as eliminating, we go out and either we assist in painting over it, which you'll see some slides later on that show some pictures of that. We have a graffiti abatement program, and our homeowners also take great pride in getting out and removing the graffiti to help eliminate it happening again.
And the difference between graffiti showing up on public versus private property. On public property, that would be something that the city was responsible for removing and or cleaning. And so that would be something that our maintenance and operations staff would handle for us. And then on private property, there are certain hot spots, I'll call them, in the city where we have contracts with the homeowners that allow us to go onto their private property and remove it. That is done for safety purposes, for retaliation or potential retaliation. So we as the police department and code enforcement, we take great pride in keeping the city safe and keeping it clean and graffiti free. So that's a service that we offer.
One thing that we try to empathize with our community is that we understand that they are the victim of a crime. The unfortunate side from the code enforcement side is that they are responsible to cover that graffiti and to try to help them with that. We, like I was saying earlier, I'm going to kind of skip down a little bit farther, but we do partner with the Agri Shop, and we have a graffiti voucher program that allows up to $30 twice a year for the community to buy supplies such as paint or brushes to cover things, graffiti remover, whatever helps them to eliminate the graffiti quickly, and again to help show that we're not after them, that we understand that they are a victim of a crime. Time frame for removals is in city code is 15 days. We stress that they get it done faster. Statistics have shown that the faster you remove it, the more discouraging it is. Taggers and actually I should say not just taggers, but anybody getting graffiti out there on fences, walls, they're sending a message of sorts, whether it's to gang messages or if it is a, hey, this is my tag and I want everybody to see who I am and how artistic I am. the faster it can be removed, the better off and more discouraging it is.
And for the prioritization based on content and location, there are things that happen in the city as well as all cities that are very unfortunate and usually crime involved. And for those things, there are people that like to tag based on those events. And so we really take a priority and try to get those cleaned up as expeditiously as possible. Even though there is a time frame per city code for removal, that would be something where we would make personal contact as soon as it was located and try to clean that up, just to also send our message that that's not going to be tolerated. And so the importance of that for removing it is to get that message so that other community members don't have to look at that. And so I'm going to skip down to the last part, which is fighting graffiti as a community. That is something that, again, we take pride in. So there's some photos coming up here. This was a great message conveyed to the community when obviously you see police officers out cleaning up. For the most part, these are gang messages. And so we had several citizens drive by honking, waving, personally pulling their vehicles over to the side, thanking us for removing this. So we're sending a message not only to the people that have put this graffiti up that it's not going to be tolerated, but also to the community, letting them know that the police department and code enforcement, we have their back.
And in this slide here, you see the same with code enforcement, out doing the same thing with police, covering graffiti, showing the community that we're putting our foot down and we're not going to tolerate it. It's something that, like I say, we get out there and try to cover as soon as we possibly can, especially on things that are owned by the city. It makes it very, very easy. Where we run into a little bit of a time crunch is with community members, and weather, of course. I mean, for the next 4 or 5 months, it's not going to be real dry. And so it's about having means and ways to get that taken care of.
Councilmember Trout.
First of all, I want to thank you folks for coming back. I brought this to the council here several months ago because I mentioned about the bridge under M Street, how I kept seeing folks out there constantly repainting that. And so I had several citizens send me emails and inquiring and asking about cameras being put up and stuff like that. So I'm glad you're here to share with us what you're still doing. My question is that once you guys take your photos of these gangs, do you keep tracks on how often they're marking the areas? And if you do you know, what else do you do to apprehend these individuals?
Graffiti takes very little time, unfortunately and fortunately. So for us to catch someone doing that is pretty unlikely. It would be a 911 call, and by the time the call actually got to the police department for an officer to be dispatched, the person is usually long gone, unfortunately again. And so what we do is, again, like Chris had mentioned, there is the online reporting, and about half the time we'll have community members submit photographs. The other times, if there's no photo, code enforcement or the police department will go out and photograph these. These are sent, we have 2 main people within the police department, a detective and an officer, that one of their main focuses among their other duties is for gangs. And part of that is also to learn the moniker or the street name that the person uses. Part of that would be that this person would also tag that on property. And once we can identify the person that is responsible for one single tag, that's when we can get the prosecutor involved and go forward with charges.
So you are keeping a data on these repeat marks that you keep?
Correct. Back on one of the, actually both of these, the photo in the middle, and then again, the one in the middle is this as well. We figured out, I believe this is the tag that we figured out who that was, and for every one that we know of where it showed up, that has been brought forward to the prosecutor's office for charging on that one individual.
Thank you.
Mayor Backus.
And if I could just remind and thank council, the 6 new officers that you approved with the addition of the utility tax increase, 2 of those officers were the PROAC, and that is those officers that are mainly dedicated to gang-related activities. So we have a very active police department, and they do some great work and work regionally to ensure that all of the information related to gangs is shared throughout the region.
Thank you. Councilmember Coleman.
During the most active months, summer months, how many new tags and art pieces and such show up?
From my perspective, it's a lot of the same tag showing up a lot. I don't know that there's necessarily a whole bunch of people that are responsible for this. When it comes to the artistic graffiti, that shows up usually on like the interurban trail area underneath the bridges. Those are very hard to track down who does those, just because of the transient, that location is very transient in nature. And they'll also show up on the other side, on the railroad track side, so very hard to find those folks, and I believe that the railroad has partially to deal with that. Easy to move around.
What would you estimate, 20 to 30 a month, new tags?
Tags? New tags?
Yeah.
Probably that's a pretty accurate number. We get a lot of the reports through a system called Cartograph, which is linked to the mobile app, and what.
Bill Pelosi and I know how to use that very
Yes.
well.
So we'll get those reports. We generally see 3 or 4 or 5 a week. They seem to go in spurts, especially it's weather dependent. When it's pouring down rain, generally don't get a lot of activity. When it's nice and dry out, good weather, we might get 15 new reportings in a week. Some of those are duplicates, some of them are unique addresses in different situations. But yeah, probably 20 to 30 is probably an average throughout the year.
And then, quick follow-on, the mix between gang-related and Picasso-related.
I would
75% tagging.
75, yeah, that's
Yeah.
probably accurate. 75% tagging, 25% artistic. The Pablo Picasso.
Councilmember Pelosi, then Troutman.
Yes, so about 6 months ago or so, I reported the garbage and tagging under the Porter Bridge going over the Green River, going up to the college. How do you monitor that and stay on top of something like that?
By report?
Just by report?
Yeah, it's not something, I mean, with the amount of square footage that we have and through the city, it would be near impossible. I don't want to say near impossible, but it would be really hard to go on a daily basis, a weekly basis. If it becomes, so there's certain hotspots that we have in town that we will check on a daily basis. If it starts to become a pattern, that way we can keep up on it. My time with the city, about 4.5 years, I think we've only had a handful of reports for underneath that bridge.
Councilmember Troutman.
Just the other day, the mayor and I went to Gilda Ray for a Blue Ribbon meeting. And it was brought to, the mayor hadn't gotten there yet, but it was brought to our attention that there's a lot of graffiti around that area. And they wanted to know how do they report it. So I mentioned it to the mayor, and we told him about my app downloaded. And so we showed him how to load it down. So you might be getting some reports from them, because they said that has really come very active over around that area.
Yeah, and we like that. We want to get on top of it right away. That way we can get out there, show to the community. Generally, it's people who live, or somebody who lives in that area that's doing the taggings. And we want to, when they see code enforcement and law enforcement and community members out there covering that graffiti, it's discouraging to them. And, we probably have a better paint supply than they do. So,
Councilmember Brown.
Yes, I had tagging on my house a few years ago. I reported it and then went and painted it. And, you know, it hasn't reoccurred, so I did it right away. But I'm wondering, is there has there been an attempt to create public pressure, a public campaign of, you know, pride in your city, pride? Does that work at all, do you think, or?
Yes, so we actually did an emphasis in a neighborhood down south that was ridden with so much graffiti, and when community members would clean up the properties, it was multicolored fences. They would clean it up with any paint that they had on hand. And so part of this project that we started with code enforcement was that we went from property owner along a fence line and got signatures and permission to cover on their private property. Part of that was also to have one specific color that would be accessible to the police department as well as code enforcement, so that when we located graffiti in the centralized area, we knew we were going to use this one specific coat of paint, so that when you drove down the street, everything looked very uniform and almost like the graffiti didn't exist. So we would hit that location at least 2-3 times a week, and every time we saw something, we would be proactive in covering it. And I would say we've seen about an 85% decrease in graffiti showing up just based on the efforts of code enforcement and the police department. So it works.
Councilmember Trout Manuel.
I know you guys give the council report, and I can't remember how often you send us a report on how many graffitis, you know, how many times you have to go out there, and how many property that, you know, have the, is there any way that we can get that report monthly, or?
Absolutely.
It would be nice for us to know. Thank you.
Councilmember DeCoursey.
So we have a 15-day period that property owners are supposed to clean it up, and if they don't, what other type of assistance do we give them, or we just automatically cite them, or what's the process?
We work with them. At the end of the day, we know they're the victim. If I knock on a door and it's an elderly resident, I will offer to assist, and depending on the size of the graffiti. If it's a small tag, take me 5 or 6 minutes to cover with some spray paint, try to let them know that I'm going to find the closest color that I have. We carry quite a few colors in our vehicles, and we'll cover it for them. It's, again, we understand they're the victim of a crime, and it's hard to knock on a door, look a homeowner or a tenant square in the face and really be mad at them. It's not their fault. So.
Mr. Steinman, in your work with and observing other communities, there are lots of different community strategies out there. I've seen some communities pass an ordinance to make it illegal for anyone under the age of 18 to buy spray rattle cans. And I'm not quite sure the effectiveness of any of those, but have you heard any unique ideas that we could look at?
I do know, as Mayor Backus just said, that we do have those ordinances. I don't necessarily know that they're that effective. Yes, we have them, and it's great because the business owners will not sell without ID. I even personally bought a spray paint, and I had to show my ID, which was awesome.
That must have felt good.
So far, I don't know what other communities do. The one, again, the project that we had started where it was an emphasis in an area that continuously got victimized, that was a pilot program even for the code enforcement and the police department, something that I don't know, but I don't think that we had ever done that before. So just coming together with both of us, getting those signatures, coming up with the same exact paint color, really emphasizing that area and stopping by frequently because of the people that live there. I was even skeptical as to the success of the program. So if we could do that in more areas, that would be amazing, because we've seen what a success it was. But if there are other options or other things that you've heard of, of course, we're always willing to take suggestions.
Well, if you come up with a good idea or hear of something good, run it up the chain and propose it to us. We want to assist too. It's it's wonderful that you have two departments working hand in glove, and we'd like to be helpful in any way we could.
Any other questions?
Just a
Councilmember
comment that, I really felt victimized. I was surprised at the level of anger that somebody would come by and do this to my house. I mean, it's 2 blocks north of the police station there on 2nd and E. And it's like, it really felt like a violation to go out there and see that on the side of my house. But we got to take care of it. It's better to do that. But thank you for the work.
Thank you. A lot of times it's very random. People, I say people, it's generally juveniles. They have a can of spray paint in their backpack or in their pocket, and they're walking around, and it's a nice, beautiful canvas. And they decide to do it, and we see it throughout the city. Just it's sporadic, and sometimes it's just a line across something. It was I want to walk by, and I'm going to hold the button and just walk. So it's a crime of opportunity.
Councilmember Troutman.
It was answered. Thank you.
In this slide here, one of the other approaches that we had come up with in the green jacket on the left side is Detective Bordash, and on the very far right one is Joe Ryan. He's the crime analyst, and they put on a seminar class for the maintenance and operations crew to help get that awareness out there, to be able to tell the difference between gang graffiti, taggings, how to report it, what we can do to help combat it. It was just one more effort that they're out there as much or more than a lot of us, and so they see it, and the faster we can get on it, the faster it goes away, the more discouraging to the offender it is. So, and then this is a really neat program that we started over in community development. It's kind of with graffiti, it's very reactive. It's hard to be proactive other than seeing something that hasn't been reported. To get in front of graffiti, kind of hard to do. We sometimes will come in the mornings on a Tuesday morning and get a report that 25 businesses on Main Street have been hit. How do we deal with that? What do we do? So over in community development, we have kind of an on-call list of code enforcement will send out an email to the CRT as well as our staff inside the building and say, if anybody's available between these hours, we're going to hit this hard. We need to get this taken care of. So it's a really great approach. When it gets them out of the office for a little bit to breathe a little fresh air, and it helps take care of the community.
When I first saw that picture on the left there at the last slide, I thought it was Councilmember Wales out there with the spray paint. I really did. Just first blush, it looks just like her.
No, I'm the one that hit Larry's house.
Where's the
I feel better
handcuffs?
about it now.
It was obviously
Where's the
right.
handcuffs?
Any other questions for our panel?
Just thank you
Thank you both.
for all the work you're doing out there.
And just real quick, the last slide is just about the community approach. And we have a group of students from the Green River Community College that called down to us one day and asked how they could get involved in their community. And graffiti cleanup was one of the things that was mentioned to them. And so every single month we have an officer that goes out with a group of students, and code enforcement provides us with a location or several locations of places that need to be cleaned up. And so we go out there and we clean those places up. And so we want to thank our partners with the Green River Community College as well.
Councilmember Pelosi.
No, that type of PR should be in the Auburn Reporter. Right, Robert?
It's been in there.
Councilmember DeCoursey.
Well, maybe it was a couple of years ago, so we had a presentation on the gang activity in the city. And just curious, are we seeing any decline in gang activity, number of gang members, or what's the status of what's going on there?
I think that we're doing a much better job of tracking it now that we have 2 officers that are dedicated to studying gangs and investigating them, but they're also being very proactive, and we have a lot of those members in jail currently. So I would say that thank you for approving those 2 positions. We've seen a decrease based on that and their efforts of investigating crimes.
Thank you.
You're making Commander Goldglazer smile.
Yep.
Councilmember Troutman.
Could you let us know how many gangs we have in this community?
I can write that down and have an answer for you, yes.
Sorry, Mayor Backus.
I will tell you that we're not going to publicize the
No,
names of
I know.
gangs.
If they
Okay.
could just email it to the council.
Well, that becomes a public
Oh,
record.
that's right, okay.
So we will not be sharing the names of the gangs because that is something that they like, right? They like the
That's-
publicity, so we will not be sharing that information publicly.
That's fine.
Councilmember DeCoursey.
Last time we had this, it was basically just a generic report,
Mhm.
and we had like 50 gang members within the city and stuff. So just general information like that, I think would be very helpful to have.
Yeah.
Okay.
See no other questions? Thank you.
Thank you for your time
Thank you.
tonight.
Moving right along, we're going to talk about ordinance number 6698. This is comprehensive plan map and text amendments. Hello, Jeff.
You talked about your homework.
Thank you, council members and mayor. This is Jeff Dixon, Planning Services Manager, and tonight I have with me Alexandria Teague, Planner 2, who both representing the Community Development Department. For discussion this evening is this 2018 Annual Comprehensive Plan Amendments, something that we ask the City Council to consider each year. The city adopted its growth compliant comprehensive plan in 1995. We've amended it each year since then. Generally, it's amended for housekeeping kind of items. And as the council is already aware, we adopted a substantially revised comprehensive plan in the end of 2015. The purpose of the city's comprehensive plan document is to serve as the overarching policy document that guides city actions. It requires that our development regulations be consistent with the city's comprehensive plan. There are two types of comprehensive plan amendments. Whoops. Policy and text amendments where we're actually changing the wording of the comprehensive plan document, and then map amendments where we're changing the city's official comprehensive plan map that shows the land use designations. We also have two sources of those amendments. They can be identified by the city staff as they're docketed and we find things that need change over the year, as well as we receive applications for comprehensive plan amendments. The city is limited under its own codes and under state law to amending the comprehensive plan only once a year, except in very limited circumstances. So because of that, the city advertises for a deadline for submission of those private applications, and we follow procedures to publish that deadline in the newspaper, to post it on the city's website, and we also send it out by regular mail to a list of interested parties. So this year we accepted applications up through June 8th of 2018. The Auburn City Code at Chapter 1422 outlines the process for comprehensive plan amendments and specifically for private amendments. It requires that there be a public hearing held with the city's planning commission, that they make a recommendation to the city council, and then the city council to consider those amendments, which generally happens towards the end of the year. So we're in the third step in that process. There were 15 items identified for annual amendments this year. Those consisted of 9 policy and text amendments and 6 map amendments. The text amendments, items 1 through 5, are incorporating the school district and the city's capital facilities plans into the city's comprehensive plan. And then items 6 through 9 were text amendments that the city initiated as for items that we had identified as needing revisions to keep consistency between the comprehensive plan and our development regulations. So essentially, they were kind of cleanup actions that we identified over the year's time. With the adoption of the substantially revised comprehensive plan in 2015, we identified that there were some things that needed some improvements or needed some corrections. These items related to the discussion of special planning areas in the land use chapter, to which is item number 6. Policy and text amendment number 7 is related to the economic development chapter and to recognize the completion of the 10-year economic development strategic plan. And then policy and text amendment number 8 is related to bringing forth a historic preservation element, really resurrecting an element that we used to have. And then policy text number 9 is to amend the discussion in the land use chapter about residential transition overlay. Going back to the map amendments, we have 6 map amendments that are part of the docket this year. The first 3 are map amendments related to the corresponding text amendments. So they're on the same subject of the special planning areas, the historic resources map, and on changes to the map to remove the residential transition overlay. The last 3 map amendments were a result of private applications that were submitted to the city. And the city received these private applications from Labrador Ventures LLC and 2 separate applications from the Auburn School District for 2 different sites in the city. Again, to meet the once-a-year limitation on all these amendments, they're all put together and described in one staff report that was part of your packet distributed tonight. I apologize for the length of that staff report, but as we take the 4 staff reports that went to the Planning Commission and combine them all together to bring the process together for the City Council action, it ends up being a large document. Each of the amendments is more fully described in the working binder that was made available to the Planning Commission and to the City Council. So that document contains all of the staff reports that went to the Planning Commission. It contains detailed staff analysis, the SEPA environmental review documents, staff reports, larger size versions of the maps, all the private application materials that were submitted, and it also includes the public comments that we received. The binder also contains the capital facilities plans for each of the 4 school districts that fall within the city and for the city's capital facilities plan. It also contains larger versions of the maps that are shown in your staff report, the maps showing the 3 initiated map changes by the city and the map changes associated with private applications. And it shows a map for both the comp plan map changes for the private ones and for the zoning map changes associated with those private applications. And these are the same items that are listed in the docket, which is provided at the beginning of this working binder. Because of the ordinance adopted by the council in June of 2017, we now have a process that allows the Planning Commission and City Council to consider both amendments to the comprehensive plan map and to the zoning map simultaneously. So those items are brought together to the Planning Commission, a recommendation made, and then brought forth to the City Council. So that affects the 3 private initiated map amendments, which is comprehensive plan and map amendment number 4, 5, and 6. And that eliminates the need for having a separate hearing conducted by the hearing examiner on those rezone actions. I'd like to go into a little bit more detail on the private applications that we received this year. So map amendment number 4 was a request that we received for Labrador Ventures for a just under 2-acre property consisting of 3 parcels located northeast of 40th and I Street Northeast. And graphic on the screen shows the proposed change to the comprehensive plan map. It's proposed to change from single-family residential and residential transition overlay to a multifamily designation. And then this map shows the proposed zoning change to go along with it. And that would change from R7 to R20 for those 3 parcels. And this last graphic shows just an aerial photo of the subject property. The next one by the Auburn School District was a request to change 2 parcels that are located on the west side of Pioneer Elementary School. And together the 2 parcels are just under an acre. They're both developed with single-family residences that the school district owns. And they're proposed to change from the single-family residential designation of the comprehensive plan to institutional. And the associated rezone is from R7 to E1 public use. And that's to facilitate a future redevelopment of Pioneer Elementary School. And this shows you that that the property and the 2 houses and its relationship to Pioneer Elementary. The last private initiated is also by the school district to change 4 parcels, just over 22 acres, located on the west side of the 5700 block of Kersey Way Southeast. And it's proposed to change from its existing designation of residential conservancy to institutional, with an associated rezone from RC or residential conservancy to institutional. So the zoning and comprehensive plan designations would agree. The 3 of the 4 parcels are developed with single-family residences, and 1 of the parcels is vacant on that request.
Councilmember Wales.
Where's that map in our packet? What page?
It's in
37?
Or 63.
I only in the packet. There's only a very small version of this, and it's on
63.
63. Yes. The larger size version is available in the working binder.
I'm sorry. Councilmember Wales.
With this change, it will allow them, I believe, to put an elementary school up there.
Yes.
And is any consideration given in this process to traffic and Kersey Road? Because I know that many of the people that live up there have issues now. And if this moves forward, what kind of changes can we anticipate that might help with traffic flow?
Sure.
Or is that just not a consideration and we just do what uses may need to be?
It's a 2-stage consideration. The applicant has prepared and submitted, along with this rezone and comp plan change, a traffic study to look at what it means to change the land use designations, recognizing that there might be a range of uses that could be allowed under the institutional designation. The school district is also preparing a more specific study that will be based upon the particular site planning and driveway locations for the actual development of the elementary school. So we have already looked at the traffic impacts of the land use change for purposes of making this decision, and that did not identify that there would be impacts or any decrease below the city's adopted level of service standard for area roadways or intersections. But we do recognize that with the new driveway and the increased traffic on that driveway, that there will be the need for transportation improvements to Kersey Way, like a turn lane and a signal to accommodate the school at this location and to not disadvantage traffic in the area.
So would additional turn lanes and whatever else might be necessary, are they the responsibility of the school district that I love or the city that our money's stretched to the nth degree?
It will be the responsibility of the development to
Thank you,
pay
Jen.
for those. So the Planning Commission held a public hearing on all 15 of these amendments on November 7th. And after taking public testimony, deliberating, the Planning Commission recommended approval of the full complement of the docketed items, the map and text changes, and the associated rezone. So for purposes of tonight, the council is provided with a draft of ordinance 6698 to reflect approval of these comprehensive plan, policy, and text amendments. And staff is requesting that this ordinance be brought back to the City Council at their December 17th meeting for action. And hopefully they're able to answer any questions.
Councilmember Holman.
Public comments, what sort of public comments did you take in?
We actually did not have public comments at the public hearings. We did receive 3 comment letters related to the private amendment by the Auburn School District for the Kersey 3 site. Most of those, as the staff report describes, were related to traffic, just as Councilmember Wales had asked about, and also just wanting to know more about the configuration or site planning for the school. There were questions about whether there would be sidewalks along Kersey's so that students could walk. School district does not plan to have any of their students walk to that school, future elementary school site. And also just a concern for how the traffic operations would work. Switching to a different site, we did get 1 comment in response to the public notice that we issued for the Labrador Ventures site at I and 40th. But that was a comment by a neighbor who thought that there were some trees on that site. Turned out the trees were on an adjacent site that she was concerned about saving.
Any other questions for our panel? Thank you both. We'll move on to ordinance number 6699. This would be relating to school impact fees.
So it must be my night. This is Jeff Dixon, Planning Services Manager again. And this item is related in part to the last one because both topics deal with school district capital facilities plans and then following on that or building upon that on establishing the school impact fees. So the last item, ordinance 6698, was related to amending the city's comprehensive plan to incorporate in the capital facilities element all of the 4 school district capital facilities plans for those school districts that fall within Auburn. And by contrast, this agenda item is related to amending the city's code section, chapter 1902, to revise the school impact fees for the year 2019 to build upon the information that has been provided in those capital facilities plans by each of the districts. So each year, the city amends its its comprehensive plan to incorporate these capital facility plans for 4 districts, and these are incorporated by reference in the facilities element. That includes the Auburn School District, Federal Way School District, Derringer School District, and the Kent School District. Each year, the districts prepare their capital facilities plans. They are approved by the school boards. They conduct their environmental review process. They prepare their capital facilities plans using a formula that originates in state law and in city code, and it generally provides for about 50% of the cost of those new facilities. And the idea of the school impact fees is it's meant to pay for those new facilities created by new dwelling units and to provide the facilities necessary by that increased population. And it is broken out by single-family dwelling units and a rate applied to them, and a different rate applied to multifamily units.
Jeff, you said that this is for new development?
Yes.
New homes?
Yes. So the school impact fee is collected at the time there is a building permit taken out for a new dwelling unit, and it applies to either multifamily or single-family dwelling units that are created new. So it's a one-time payment.
Thank you. Councilmember Wales.
I bring this up every year, that Federal Way for multifamily dwelling units charges $19,000, where the rest of our Auburn, Derringer, Kent are around 2 and 4. So what that results in is a forcing of multifamily units coming down this way and Federal Way not picking up their fair share. With my experience in working in schools, that multifamily dwellings usually have a different socioeconomic group, and when I see that they want $19,000 per unit, I feel like they're using the marketplace to force multifamilies with higher needs into our area and Kent and others. And no, there's not much that we can do about it, but I think as we work with legislators in our communities, we need to be aware of that.
Mayor Beck.
Jeff, if I'm not mistaken, there is no zoned area within the Kent school, or within the Federal Way School District that is zoned for multifamily. So at this point in time, it's kind of a non-issue for us, but I agree with you that their exorbitant fees for multifamily essentially
Forces it all down.
well, it essentially eliminates any construction of multifamily within the city of Auburn or within the Federal Way School District, but we don't have any zoned area that would be appropriate for multifamily.
That is correct. This issue came up last year when they had the substantial increase in their calculated fee rates for multifamily residential for the Federal Way School District. And but the city of Auburn does not have areas that overlap into the Federal Way School District that are zoned for multifamily. Our areas are all zoned single family, so we wouldn't have that effect of forcing or discouraging multifamily just because we don't have any.
So,
Go ahead.
Federal Way has no areas that are zoned for multifamily dwelling units?
Let me try and rephrase that.
Yes,
The
please.
part of the Federal Way School District that overlaps into the city of Auburn, Auburn has that area zoned for single-family development and not for multifamily. So it doesn't have any effect on those areas occurring within the city of Auburn.
Correct. But it would still, if they're, it's still going to force, if a builder is looking for a place, since there's nothing that's available there, they're going to be more likely to look here, because do we have areas currently that are zoned for multifamily housing?
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
In the city of Auburn, but
Yes.
not in the Federal Way School District.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm not real protective of the Federal Way School District like I am Auburn. Sorry.
And I just want to add that the Federal Way District, the reason they had a large increase that we considered last year was because they had many large multifamily projects go in. They experienced a much higher than predicted student population in those multifamily dwelling units. And then also because they had gone through a study with their school board to reevaluate their needs and identified many more needs for their school district. That's the two factors that largely contributed to their substantial jump in fees.
Councilmember Wales.
Yes, and the Auburn School District does that on an annual basis, working from the county live births and extrapolating out, and that's probably the reason why they're renovating and building, thanks to our lovely citizens, the number of new schools.
So, included with your packet is a draft ordinance 6699 that has been prepared based upon the school impact fees that were calculated by the districts in their capital facilities plans. One other interesting note is that this year, the Derringer School District experienced a decrease in both their multifamily and their single-family rates. And so it is less than the rate that Pierce County has applied. Historically, in previous years, the City Council has amended the rate and reduced it from what was as shown in the Derringer Capital Facilities Plan in order to maintain consistency with the Pierce County rate. So we weren't having the unintended consequence of forcing that. But this year, that circumstance doesn't exist.
Okay, great.
So again, like the last item, we would like to request that this ordinance 6699 be brought back for council consideration at your December 17th meeting. Any questions?
Any questions for the panel? Thank you, Jeff.
Great, thank you.
We'll do one more item, and then we'll take a 5 or 10 minute break here. Ordinance number 6708.
Good evening again. Thank you for having me. Chris Barrick, City of Auburn Code Compliance Supervisor.
Doug Ruth, Assistant City Attorney of Auburn.
Tonight, I bring forward to you Ordinance 6708 in relation to code enforcement. It's broken down into 3 sections of, for enforcement needs. The first section, there are occasions in our day-to-day operations where we come across situations and violations of the city code that are uncorrectable. A couple examples of that would be illegal dumping. Catch somebody in the middle of that, wanting to be able to stop them immediately. Cutting down of a 50-year-old tree that's 3 feet around. There are correctable measures for that. Planting new trees around to take up the canopy of that past tree, but there's no correction to replace a 3-foot wide tree. This first section would allow us to eliminate the need for a notice to correct, which by city code allows 1 to 15 working days to correct that violation. It would allow us to immediately go to an infraction, so there was an immediate penalty for that act that essentially is uncorrectable. The second section of this would pertain to the requirement for certified mailings. We did some looking at other state and local governments and how they process their mailings for notices. Most of them use first class, U.S. Postal Service first class. Our code currently speaks to the effect that we need to do first class mailing as well as certified mailing. What we found in the past is that becomes somewhat cumbersome for the officer and also confusing for the person who's receiving those notices. We send them first class, which generally is a faster method of service. A few days later, they may get a notice saying that they have a certified package at the post office. They go there. We may receive a phone call saying, "Is this something new? Is this old?" And then we also found roughly about 95% of those went either unclaimed or undelivered. And it's a large expense, and since our court is using first-class mail to mail all their court proceedings, we felt that it would be appropriate to mirror that. And then the last section of the code, or of the ordinance, talks to the International Property Maintenance Code and some sections that we've adopted. Council has adopted the code, and there are some sections that it requires the local government to fill in dates, measurements, and we came across a situation earlier this year where a tenant was renting an apartment, said that the area where their kitchen was, when they opened the window in the summertime, when they're preparing food, flies would come in because there were no screens. We looked in our property maintenance code, we applied the code, and were challenged, and actually, in talking with legal, backed down from that because we didn't have the appropriate dates in there of when those screens were required. With the help of Doug Ruth, he and I looked at some insect time periods for our climate, and in your packet you'll see the dates that are appropriate that we felt for those screens to be up. Does that mean that we're gonna, most likely once they're up, they're gonna be up. They're not gonna take them down in the winter months, but at least it gives us the tools that we need to enforce that section of the code.
Chris, is there any attempt to revise the International Property Maintenance Code so that it corrects those anomalies, basically?
It's open from open for each jurisdiction to determine their dates. Maybe in a climate that's sunny all the time and their insect life is year-round, they would want to put those year-round dates in there. That's why they leave those sections open for the governing agent to fill those in.
Any questions for the panel?
Thank you for your time.
Take a 6 or 7 minute break.
I love that. That was great.
What do you call that? I mean,
Where they, it was, yeah,
continue to pass it off.
yeah, it was
You
a,
want to call it a flea flicker, but that's not what
not what it
it
is, no, it's laterals. is what
They're
they are.
laterals, yeah, but there should be a better name for it than laterals.
Yeah, was it? You
Somebody
remember-
else's problem?
Somebody.
Yeah, yeah.
No, not lateral police officers. Throwing the ball, you know. Yesterday Miami did that to win. They kept.
That was very
Make
cool.
a map.
Tossing it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was something else.
Yeah.
Looking for a broom so you can sweep
Wood
that up.
cocoa.
How's your day?
Long.
How's your night? Yeah.
Longer.
But it's that overtime that makes it worthwhile.
Yeah.
Almost double time by now, right?
Triple.
Triple that, there you go.
She don't get that.
Exactly, you darn right.
Give us a few more hours, you might as well stay here all night.
It's gonna feel like that this week. I got like 3 nights of that.
Well, I guess we're just gonna have to roll out of bed for you here.
That's it.
Maybe emergency planning has something in
I
mind
do.
for you.
Yeah.
Cots.
As soon as Bill gets back, we'll start up.
Commander, does the PD have a bunk room for guys that have to have court in the morning?
We have a quiet room. It's got a recliner in it, although the paper towel dispenser in the break room is right on that wall.
I'm surprised it survived.
Some people do use it, though. Yeah.
Well, they can always go to the
Paper
fire
towel
department.
dispenser survived.
Yeah.
Be a definite deterrent to using that recliner.
Did you get the recliner from fire?
Yeah, probably.
Would be well broke in. Yeah, I had lunch today with Jim Farrell and the Mountain View Fire Department.
I didn't even get to
Not Mayor Farrell, the other Jim Farrell.
Yes, our Farrell.
Our Farrell.
Bunch of that.
Coach, as I like.
Okay, we will reconvene the meeting here, and we're going to be talking about ordinance number 6707. Small wireless facilities and public right of way.
So good evening, just for the record, I'm Ingrid Gao with the Public Works Director, and Amber Price, who is our right-of-way specialist. So the small cell code update is what we're going to talk to you about tonight. And the first thing to understand about the small cell code is what are small cell facilities, small cell wireless facilities, and what are we doing with our franchising code. So a small cell wireless facility is smaller than what you see as a typical cell tower out there. It contains radios, antennas that require power and fiber in order to transmit cellular phone and data signals over their systems. And they're typically attached onto utility poles, streetlight poles, other poles within the right-of-way. They're not as tall as your typical cell phone tower. They're usually anywhere from 25 to 45 feet in height, usually under 50 feet in most cases, whereas your typical cell phone tower is 70 to 75 or higher, 100 to 150, depending on where they're at. The way that the FCC has described the small cell wireless facilities, they also include that the antenna is less than 3 cubic feet in size, so the total mass has to fit within a 3 cubic foot volume. And then their equipment needs to be less than 28 cubic feet in volume, so this is the associated equipment with that antenna. There's some limitations on how big those facilities can be. So what I have up on the screen for you is some examples of where you can see some small cell facilities that have been put onto other facilities. So here you can see all this brown painted equipment, and up at top is the small cell facilities on a power pole. On this one you can see an additional antenna that's added to the back of a streetlight pole. And on this one you can see where there's an antenna added to the top of an existing streetlight.
Could you go back to the first one? I didn't hear what you were saying.
So this pole that you see here, that's painted brown, that is actually the antenna for the system. And this is some of the equipment for the system.
And how low is that from the pole? Can the public?
No, it would be above general height for where people can reach when standing. I mean, that's 8 feet, so it's going to be well above that. We would require anything to be above that for clearances anyway.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So some regulatory background. So there's been recent pressures by the wireless communications community to make it easier for them to process the placement of these antennas and facilities within the public right-of-way. Many of you may have heard of it as referenced as 5G. So this is something that all of the companies are working towards rolling out across the country and as frequently as they can in order to improve coverage for wireless services. So in September, the FCC adopted a declaratory ruling and third report and order that takes effect on January 14th. That ruling actually sets some requirements and limitations on local agencies for how we can process, approve, and charge for permits for small wireless facilities within our right-of-way. So this order has been challenged in the courts, but at this point there has been no decision made. And the challengers may ask the court to delay implementation of the new rules, but we're currently operating under the premise that the new rules go into effect on January 14th and so we need to be ready. Our current code, our current franchise code really doesn't cover small wireless cell facilities well for what we want to actually try to cover. So what are we doing to address this? In your packet you have the draft new code language. It is a brand new section to the franchising code, section 2014. And it basically requires small cell companies to have a franchise with the city in order to have their facilities within the city similar to any other telecommunication facility. And it also requires them to meet the requirements of the FCC order as it currently stands, which also provides for processing permit processing timeframes and limitations. This shortens those processes quite significantly in the FCC order. It also limits the size of these facilities, similar to what I talked about on that first slide. And then it also has the limitations on exactly how much we can charge for these types of facilities within the right-of-way. The code, as drafted, some key points in there. We do require individual sites be applied for and approved by the city through a small wireless facility permit. So what you're going to see as we go forward is you're going to see a general franchise agreement for citywide approval for their use, and then after that there would be individual, or concurrent with that, there would be individual permits issued for their specific locations within the city. The reason we want to do that is because we need to look at each location to make sure it works within that location with the requirements around it, and to address the next piece of this, which is the specific design standards. So location placement, concealment requirements, avoiding conflicts with our city telecommunication facilities that are out there, our wireless facilities that are out there, and making sure that the facilities that they want to place these facilities on are structurally adequate to handle the load.
Councilmember Wills.
So on these city right-of-ways, are these our poles or their poles?
So the short answer to that is it depends. They can choose to place this on PSE or Comcast poles that are out there in the right-of-way if PSE and Comcast allow them to attach. They also, the way the FCC order reads, and Amber can correct me if I'm wrong because she's been very knowledgeable in all of this, The way the order reads is we basically have to consider and look for allowing it to be on our city infrastructure. That is not only poles, but also potentially traffic signals, span wire facilities, and our own buildings and our own utility facilities as well, basically anything owned by the public.
A couple of months ago, and I don't have any of the terminology down, but we were looking at doing free Wi-Fi, you know, community-wide, and we wanted to maybe use some of those smaller boxes, but we couldn't. The expense that the private industry was going to charge us for the installation of it was so prohibitive that we couldn't do it. Is this going to help us be able to do some of our own expansions for our community members at a reasonable price?
This doesn't necessarily change any of those requirements, so a big piece of, as I recall that situation, was the cost for actually putting these facilities on PSE poles, other owner poles, and what was required in order to get approval from them in order to attach to those poles. This doesn't affect that at all. What the FCC ruling does is it requires us to allow them to go on our facilities. That doesn't necessarily mean that our facilities, especially aluminum streetlight poles, are structurally capable of handling the facilities depending upon what they want to put on that light.
So this helps them, but not us.
It helps the public in that it provides better coverage for 5G, but
Okay.
it is generally to their benefit, is how the current order is written.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Pelosi.
Councilmember Wales touched upon this, but I want to be more specific. Can this in any way feature broadband in the future? Assist broadband installation.
So, I mean, it's a wireless facility, so they can sell those services to any company that is offering wireless services. As far as expanding free Wi-Fi to the city, it depends upon what services they want to offer to the public. And a lot of these, and Amber can correct me if I'm wrong, a lot of these are selling services to companies like Sprint, AT&T, Verizon for cell phone service. And I don't know if you've seen anything else in the recent requests.
You know, years ago when Councilmember Thordarson was on the council, there was a laminated block on Auburn Way North by the ice cream store there, and the big grocery store. Right, it was implanted right in the sidewalk. I remember he was raising a ruckus because it was implanted right in the sidewalk, and I don't think there's room enough for a handicapped wheelchair to get by. I don't know, but.
And that is part of those location placement issues that we would want to look at. So if what they're putting up requires that pole to be replaced, if there's an existing pole that they want to go on, then we need to look at, is there appropriate clearances for ADA, for head clearances, all of that needs to be looked at in that.
Yeah, this was probably about 2 foot wide laminated wood. And it went up probably 15, 20 feet.
Councilmember DeCoursey.
On page 119, section B, it talks about the compliance issues related to interference with the city's communications. So it mentions the FCC makes a determination, or the FCC can make a determination of the interference. How is the FCC involved, and how do they know what's going on in this process?
So it has to do with the frequencies that are provided to the companies for them to use versus the frequencies that we use for our systems, and making sure that they're not overlapping frequencies.
So, but how is the FCC, how do they monitor that? Do they monitor it at all?
So even for our systems, we actually have an FCC license for our frequencies for our systems, and so does everybody else that uses a frequency within that. So they have those records within their permit records.
So they would know if there's some sort of interference going on?
That is the intent behind that system. So I do want to point out that some of the design standards, the more detailed design standards, we will actually be incorporating into our engineering design standards document, so that we have the flexibility as we continue to move into this realm and we look at what issues we have coming up over the next year as we start implementing these sites, so that we can make changes to those design standards. But generally, the 4 points on that last bullet are the main points that we want to make sure that we cover with small cell providers. And specifically so that we are looking at what can we do for concealment within the right-of-way. These are at much lower heights, and so they are within the vision of anybody driving and walking down a corridor. We would like to make sure that we still look at what the aesthetics on that corridor look like as these facilities go in place. So what you see on the screen are some examples of different types of stealth options that are out there. There are many, many different kinds of stealth options. One of the requirements in there is that they provide us a concealment plan and show us what they're going to do to try to conceal that, the antenna and the equipment. So you can see on this one here, it's a very small, low profile, painted black, trying to blend in with the pole. This one has some banners on either side of it, hiding the equipment that's behind it. And then this one is basically a shield around the antenna, again, hiding it.
Ingrid, what kind of education program are we putting out there to let our constituents know that these may be coming up so that they don't think it's something else?
So it's not necessarily an education program with the public. They're part of the requirement for them to provide us the FCC permitting that they have is to address the main concern that people are going to have with wireless communication facilities is this going to hurt people, animals, anything else that's out there? That's the main question. Similar to when we did our AMI infrastructure for the water meters, those were the main questions that we got.
You said utility infrastructure, so a water tower. I remember the water tower up in Lakeland before it was rebuilt. It was a hodgepodge of everybody's antennas, and they kind of overlapped, and it was dangerous to climb up there.
So the code that's in front of you tonight and that you'll see on Monday night's meeting is for addressing franchise use within the public right-of-way. Under our Chapter 20, we actually have a section in there on leasing from public facility use. So that's where we would be covering their use of any other city facilities. The piece that still is in there in the FCC order is that it doesn't give us much flexibility to tell them that they can't use those facilities. We have some flexibility to come up with some requirements on there, but we have to be consistent in how we're applying that, and we can't just say no because we don't want to. There has to be reasons behind it.
Kansas City has a standard for all their poles in the city, so that if you have to touch a pole for a modification, you have to reorder the pole to the current standard in the city. Have we looked at doing something like that for, doesn't mean everything has to be changed at once, it's just, this is our standard.
Yeah, so we're currently working with pole manufacturers to come up with options that we could use for the cell providers that are using our facilities. But currently, our current standards that are out there do not necessarily cover this type of use. And we have multiple different types of poles that exist out in our standards. We have our downtown standard for the black lights that you see down Main Street, as well as the taller lights on some of our arterial roadways in downtown. And then you have the standard Cobra head luminaires for the remainder of the city. So there's a couple different standards out there, and then we also have an alternative lower level light, pedestrian level light for residential communities that they can opt to, that developers can opt to install as well. So we're looking at how do we address all of those different types of light usages that we have within the city in in those design standards.
Who actually interfaces with the private ownership of these, like PSE and what have you? Is that the city or is that the individual companies that want to put the wireless units on them?
Are you talking about if they want to place them on PSE poles? The company would communicate that with PSE. What we have asked for in the code is some documentation to us showing that the owner of the pole has agreed to allow them to do it.
I see. Okay, thank you. Any other questions for the panel? We have a new agenda item here for item 3G, which is the selection of special focus area chairs and titles. I think the council members have been given a rap sheet here which covers some modifications to our current special focus areas as suggested or recommended by the directors of these different areas. So I hope you've taken a moment to take a look at these. And I think the next step after you've had a chance to peruse this would be to assign individual council members to chair and vice chair each one of these focus areas. And if we have any particulars that the council would like to recommend, it's open for discussion. Councilmember Pelosi.
Bob, I'd recommend that you go through each of these focus areas.
Sure.
And just show the recommendations by staff.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, let's look at the first one, which is the health. It was Health and Human Services. Now it's going to be called Community Wellness, if the council concurs with that. Public wellness has been taken off of that as the second item and added down below. I'm not sure I understand the nature or the reason for that, but it's also added community equity. Yes, Councilmember Wales.
We were lucky, our chair, Councilmember Trout Manuel, and I met with Jeff Tate and kind of reviewed this, and we tried to make it clearer and cleaner. And so this reflects some of our recommendations too. That doesn't mean that it's been perfectly vetted, but we feel comfortable with what's listed here.
Jeff, would you like to, I'm sorry,
Okay, Councilmember Trout
can
Manuel.
I ask Jeff to come forward and talk to us a little bit about what we've done here?
Sure. First of all, the name itself of the special focus area. So, Health and Human Services to Community Wellness. One of the reasons for that recommendation is simply because community wellness is a broader reflection of the topics that are covered under that special focus area. And one of the things about the current name of Health and Human Services, a lot of times it gets truncated to Human Services. And there's actually a group within the city of Auburn that is the Human Services Division. So so things start getting a little muddy, and just in terms of the naming of things. And Human Services is only one part of what the special focus area, since its inception, has a focus on. So that's part of the reasoning behind a proposed name change. And then just to add some clarity down into the individual subject areas. So for community wellness, to speak to public health and wellness, and the type of work that the city is doing with respect to healthy initiatives in Auburn. Community and neighborhood services. We have neighborhood programs and we have community programs that are run through the city. Homelessness has always been a part of Health and Human Services, but also including the fact that this city is intentional about homelessness prevention, and that should be part of that that special focus area as well. Housing, affordable housing has always been part of the special focus area, but a lot of times we talk about attainability as well as affordability and quality. We have a lot of policies and objectives about providing not just affordable housing, but making sure that it's a quality product. Human and social services, that just is there to capture what was in the title before. Domestic violence services, that has been part of the committee, the special focus area. And then community equity is just a broader way of talking about a lot of the different types of things the council already talks about, which is how to bring equity to our community from age and different cultures and populations, different socioeconomic groups throughout our community. So after a conversation with Councilmember Trout-Manuel and Councilmember Wales, conversation with Mayor Backus, it seemed like there might be good to just kind of refresh on the special focus area a little bit.
How does everyone on the council feel about these changes? Do you concur? Pretty much?
Yeah.
Councilmember Trout-Manuel.
Well, community wellness also comes together with what Mayor Backus is always talking about. And so when it was brought up to us, it fits. It goes with everything that Director Jeff Tates had just said. So that's why we brought it to council.
Councilmember Pelosi.
Under the blue, I think we should add where it says sister cities, we should put in there international, because that's the name of the organization. Sister Cities International. Just add the word international.
Question, under the blue?
We're still under the green.
We're still working on the green.
I
It's just
thought
fast.
you were asking about everything.
Yeah, we're going to take them one at a
Oh,
time.
okay, I apologize.
Kind of work our way through.
I apologize for
That's okay,
trying
hold
to-
that thought.
Oh, I will.
Okay, but the only question I have is we've got public wellness added in down below. Why did we strike it out up above?
There's a clean copy on the second page.
Pardon?
There's a clean copy on your second page of what it would look like without the strikeouts.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I didn't even turn the page.
Actually, public wellness isn't there. It wasn't intended to be there.
No.
So,
It wasn't intended to be there.
so it should have been crossed out.
Right.
Okay, that answers that. So I guess we should be looking at the second page then.
Well, this is.
Yeah,
this
look
is
at
just
both
showing
of
you
them.
The first
No.
page. Okay. Would now be the appropriate time to ask those individuals who might want to chair this committee?
I still would like to be on this because I'm on the National Leagues, also on some of these committees, and so I would like to still stay on this committee.
Would you like to
So
chair that
moved.
committee? Yeah.
No moving, no moving.
I knew that was coming. Would you like to continue
Well,
to
it
chair?
depends on who, I would, but if there's someone else that would like to come in and chair, and if Ms. Wells still stays on, then I was going to suggest that as rotate, since I've already chaired it once. Yeah.
Councilmember Wales, how do you feel about
I feel fine.
chair or vice chair?
I'd like to kind of wait and see how they all shake out. Because I'm kind of interested in some change, and I might be interested in economic development, finance, and technology along the same line as the ad hoc committee on finance.
I believe you can be on more than one, can you?
Uh-huh. Yeah.
So we'll consider Councilmember Trout-Manuel for the chair for the moment, and move on to the blue, which is the finance and economic development, which is now being referred to as finance, technology, and economic development. Now, Councilmember Pelosi.
Yeah, I'd just like to add the word international after
International.
Sisters City International.
Okay.
That's what it's referred to out in the.
Any objections to the changes that are noted? Or the title?
One quick comment.
Yes.
I'm
Councilmember.
much more comfortable having city budget and amendments struck from this because that's something that we all discuss as a group. And we have an ad hoc committee that does the bi-weekly reports, so.
It is struck.
It is.
I know, I'm just saying, I think it's a good
Oh,
thing to have it struck.
you like that.
I'm
Oh,
supporting that.
I got you.
Okay. Any objection to that?
You want international added to sister cities after or international sister cities?
After.
After.
Sister Cities International.
City
International.
International? National sister cities. But fine.
I like
Okay.
brother cities.
Spoken like the chair.
Is there anyone that would like to chair this committee? Councilmember Wales.
I'd be interested.
How about vice chair?
John?
Sure.
Unless Councilmember Brown would like to.
Fine.
Would you like to move on? Okay.
I think we're just throwing our names out, you know, it might shake out anyway, totally different.
All right, are there any other recommendations for finance, technology, and economic development? Okay, well, moving on to public works and community development. It remains the same title. Councilmember Pelosi.
I'm wondering why Public Works is generally on its own. Now we're intertwining community development.
It was always on there.
Yeah, I know, but I'm just commenting the fact that,
What was your concern, Bill?
well, I don't think engineering, public works is community development, that's all.
It's Public Works.
But public works, I can see public works being a standalone name for red.
Well, have you looked at the second page and see what they're proposing?
The same thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I am.
We've taken engineering out of there, I think.
I
Just as a
think of
description.
public works as engineering.
I see. Councilmember DeCoursey.
Just maybe point of clarification is when our committee went through this for the special focus areas, we had some discussions about what might be paired together in this, so it was, recommended we have the 4 focus areas in that. And as we concluded, we felt the fit between community development with public works was kind of the right fit because of the interrelationships that occur sometimes between those two. Although public works, engineering is a separate area, but we just felt that it was more likely to come together as a grouping, and that's the only reason why we did it. So,
Ingrid, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, so the suggestion here is basically, previously you had utilities, transportation, streets, engineering, and airport listed separately, and a bunch of other things in there. This is just trying to simplify it, so we have utilities, which covers both our maintenance and operations, as well as our engineering type work, planning, capital projects, all of that. You have transportation, which covers the entire transportation system, whether it's maintenance and operation, or whether it's engineering work, planning for that, or capital projects. And then we added in right-of-way management, which is basically covering things like you talked about tonight with the small cell code, street vacations, those types of actions is something else that Public Works does. So instead of focusing so much on where we're located in the titles of this, it's more looking at what are the programs that we're actually doing within that special focus area.
So does everybody kind of feel that engineering should not be a identifiable entity on the second page? Councilmember DeCoursey.
Well, I think just the way Ingrid just explained it, I mean, I had the question related to streets engineering capital projects, but as she looks at it being melded into other areas, it'll still be covered, just under a different title. So I'm fine with that.
Councilmember Wales.
The one that I have a hard time with on that is cultural arts and public arts. It's kind of touchy-feely, where the rest doesn't seem so touchy-feely to me.
Just call it arts.
Mayor Backus.
So if you might recall, when these were first split up, there was a desire for the municipal services side to have one aspect of Parks, Arts, and Recreation and just have it Parks and Recreation, and then under Community Development would be the public art piece of it. Am I saying that right, Jeff?
Yeah, I think there's for arts and culture, there's a planning and a capital piece to that. Like there's actual projects that are out in the community. And I think that's why there's a part that is under Public Works and Community Development, and then more of the programming side of things falls under the Muni Services. That was the original intent by having kind of a piece in each special focus area.
Can I answer your question?
Yeah, great. I like the reasoning.
Any other comments about the restructuring of that particular focus area? Okay, do we have any nominations for that position?
I still would not have a problem being a chair of that committee, that focus area.
I could continue as vice chair. So that would be Councilmember DeCoursey as the chair and Councilmember Baggett as the vice chair. And now moving on to municipal services. Does everyone concur with the changes there, or have any questions or concerns? Hearing none.
Hearing none.
I would be willing to serve on this special focus area. I don't know if my colleague, Councilmember Pelosa, wants to chair or not, but.
I don't.
Oh, that's true, that's right.
I don't, Larry, but I could, now, does everyone have a chair, vice chair?
I
So
don't
far.
I don't have a vice chair.
Well, no, but you've
Not
got a
everybody
chair.
will have a chair and a vice chair spot.
Is anyone missing in that row of assignments?
Just a vice chair for community wellness. We
Now,
don't have-
and I feel bad bumping John Holman on finance, technology, and economic
You didn't
development.
bump me.
Yeah, I might.
You bumped Mr. Brown.
Oh, I want to be chair.
Well, you should be chair.
Well, no, that's bumping you. You are chair.
Okay.
No kids.
Bob, I'll volunteer for vice chair of Muni Services.
Okay, so we'll keep that as Councilmember Brown as the chair.
Yep.
And Deputy Mayor Pelosa as
It's his favorite.
vice chair.
Wouldn't be right for him to pass the gavel to himself, I take it.
Never know. Protocol being what it is. So we're only missing the vice chair for the community wellness. Anybody want to step up for that? Councilmember DeCoursey? Okay. Thank you.
Claude?
Okay, and just for your dance cards, yes, Steve?
For the breakout of the special focus areas and the titles of all of those, I'll bring that back to you next week. It requires a rule change in your council rules. It requires an amendment to section 16.1A. So I will bring them back and you can get a final set of a look at those. The chair, vice chair stuff that y'all do, it doesn't have to be in the rules.
Councilmember Pelosi?
Bob, can you just go through it real quickly and tell us who the chair, vice chair?
Yes, we have community wellness. We have Councilmember Trout Manuel as the chair and Councilmember DeCoursey as the vice chair. Finance, Technology, and Economic Development is Councilmember Wales as the chair. Councilmember Holman is the vice chair. Public Works and Community Development is Councilmember DeCoursey as the chair and Councilmember Baggett as the vice chair. Municipal Services is Councilmember Brown as the chair and Deputy Mayor Pelosi as vice chair. Just to make a note here so you can get your dance cards in order, all of the meeting dates at the bottom, those will correspond to the 2019 calendar. Yes, Councilmember DeCoursey.
Just as a suggestion as we're going through this, when we do the ordinances and resolutions, there's been communication from you as Deputy Mayor as to which ones we should handle in our areas for making the motions for those. Each document we receive has the cover page that shows a staff member and council member. The council member is usually blank, so I would recommend that we actually take those and place the council member's name on that so there's no confusion as to who should be making the motions for the resolutions and ordinances going forward.
I believe that would be in order, yes.
Yeah, that's a good suggestion, since we've had confusion before.
Yeah, it's usually been the deputy mayor that has talked to the individual council members about doing that. Councilmember Wales.
Well, I don't necessarily agree. And I've shared this a little bit with Nancy, that sometimes individuals here have a great deal of expertise and aren't the chair, and they add an authenticity to backing up an ordinance or a resolution. Now, I know this doesn't preclude them from doing it after the person who made the motion speaks, but it seems awfully
Well, we've had several situations here, conditions that at a council meeting, when the motion is asked to be made, everybody's looking around the dais to find out if somebody's going to do it, and sometimes that actually, nobody raises their hand. So,
Just a
Councilmember
suggestion.
DeCoursey.
So if a individual council member is, really would like to make the motion for a particular item, then I think that's just a matter of communication with the deputy mayor, saying, by the way, I know that that's Councilmember DeCoursey's area, but I would really like to make the motion for this particular resolution and communicate that ahead of time.
Yeah, I believe that would be up to the deputy mayor,
I think that's
the council member.
Yeah.
Councilmember Trout Manning.
Yeah, because there has been some confusions at time when you have spoke to, you normally would call and say, your topic's coming up, I'd like you to make the motion, and someone else make the motion. So
Yeah,
there was
it's
some
happened on 2 or 3
yeah,
occasions.
confusions on that too.
Councilmember Brown.
Well, I think after a motion is made, seconded, then the mayor will generally refer back to the maker of the motion. They describe the purpose for the motion, And then I think the mayor generally asks, is there any other comments? If people feel strongly or have information to add or have an argument to make, that's the time anyone can step up, right? So.
Kind of like the idea of having the option of going to the deputy mayor and saying, you know, I don't want to make this motion, and I know that so-and-so does. I know that when I look at the airport, no matter who the airport is under, I look to John and I really look to our deputy mayor because of personal experience and longevity of working with that group. And that means a lot to me as I'm looking at how I'm going to vote. So as long as we have the flexibility.
Well, yeah, I think you mentioned the word flexibility, which I think is good, and I think we should adopt that. I think that the whole intent here is to streamline this process a little bit to keep the ball rolling, and we can be mindful of everyone's time. And I think that was really the intent here. Not to, if someone really has something to say, to speak up. But yes, I think that would be in order. Okay. Moving on to item 4 on the agenda, finance and economic development discussion items. Gambling and card room revenue. That be Councilmember Brown. We turn this over to you.
Yep.
Okay.
So, thank you, Director
You're on.
Coleman.
Hello, good evening. A few study sessions back, there was a request for an update on our card room gambling pull tab code here in the city. The city code follows the state law in regards to what can be levied or set on receipts from card rooms. And the city used to have a 5% of gross receipts on pull tabs, punch boards. But in 2012, some of the businesses that had punch boards and pull tabs came to a municipal services committee and requested that the council consider changing that from a gross receipts to a net receipts. So it'd be gross less prizes. And the council agreed to do that. So in 2012, they passed an ordinance to change from the 5% of gross to 10% of net receipts. Additionally, there was a question about our card rooms and what the city had done with that card room tax over the years. And for many years, many years, it was 12%, which is the maximum amount that may be levied on card rooms here in the city. And there was 2 at the time. There was the one where Iron Horse Casino was at. There's also one up in North Auburn, I think it was the Town and Country, an old restaurant that used to be up there, if you recall. That also had a card room, but then that has long gone away. Shortly after the recession, the owner, or the representing owner of Iron Horse Casino came in and asked the city to temporarily or reduce the card room tax. The financials were provided to me. I reviewed the financials. They were not doing well, and I relayed that information to council. And the card room tax was lowered to 4% for 2 years. And I think that was in 2010, right? And then that lapsed in June of 2012. And then in the fall of 2012, the representative or representing owner came forward again and asked for the city to again reduce that to 4%. And the city at that time did permanently reduce the card room tax to 4%. There, from the time when the card room was not doing well, there was a couple of promissory notes outstanding from the first time when it was reduced temporarily, and then from the second time when the 4% lapsed and it went back up to 12%. So the card room had to pay the 12%. There was a couple of notes, they were combined into one note, and currently that note is at $220,000. Payments are amortized over a 30-year period. There's a $4,000 a month payment that is made with about $3,300 going towards the note, and the other is booked as interest here in the city, as interest revenue. That note matures next October 1, 2019. We're almost into 2019. And the estimated balance will be about $188,000 at that time. And then I provided some graphs for you to look at the revenues of what they've been over the last 8 years, 7-8 years here in the city. And you can see under the first graph, which is punch boards and pull tabs, that after the businesses petitioned council, you can see that there was a decrease for time being, and then they perked back up. I'd have to go in and look at the detail, but maybe we had some new businesses, or some businesses in town that started doing the punch cards, pull tabs. But then they began to ebb away again. We've had some older restaurants around on Main Street and Auburn Way that have closed that I think were large punch board pull tab sellers. And then with the fire down here, there was another business in there that did do punch boards and pull tabs. So I would expect those revenues to continue to ebb away, or a new norm. On the page 123, there's a couple more graphs, and there's the card room receipts there. The spike in 2016 was twofold. One was the business was sold, and there was a large $100,000 payment on the note, and also the owner had become delinquent on the note, and so there was back payments plus penalties and interest that were levied, and the owner paid that. So that's in 2016, so that's why we had that large spike. Now, with the new owner, they pay both the note and the card room tax on a monthly basis. It used to be quarterly or under the former ownership, very sporadic, but they've been very routine for the last 2 years. And finally, our amusement receipts down there, you see we have a large uptick in 2018, and there's a business that opened here in Auburn that has a lot of amusement games, and that is from when it was open till through June 30th, those were the receipts that were remitted to the city.
Wowzers.
I don't know about their games, but the food's good.
That's it.
Does any council member have questions? All right.
I do.
Yes, Council Member Pelosi.
Page 122, second paragraph. Last sentence. Additionally, Emerald Downs began card room activities and receipts from those activities began first quarter 2017 and are continuing through present date. So where does the sovereign nation come in?
Well, it's not on tribal or trust land at this time.
Oh, it isn't?
No,
Okay,
they have applied.
okay. Thank you. That's it? You took care of me. Thank you.
Any other questions? Then we'll move to the next agenda item. That's item 4B.
Okay, in front of you here is the third quarter report. And we are chugging along. We're doing well. Our revenues are ahead of our budget year to date in most categories, but overall they're ahead. And expenditures are less than budget, which is where we'd like them to be. We still see that little thing in property taxes there that looks like it's just, I think it's less than $100,000, I think the difference. I'm looking at the chart that I have up there. But again, the reason for that, I believe, is we don't have as many refinancings happening. People aren't refinancing their homes because the interest rates have gone up. And when people refinance their homes, generally property taxes are paid for the entire year. And with fewer financing, we're slowing down. The money will come in because it's been levied on the property. It's just a timing issue. And then again, we see that our development and permit revenues are not as robust as we had hoped they would be this year. And we also see as we get through here, our sales tax on construction has ebbed. It's still above budget, but it's less than what we received last year through this time. And as the permits fall off, the sales tax on construction falls off, and the new construction that it comes through on property tax will decrease. So those are things and we did see that this year a bit. Our new construction property tax was less than it was last year, and I anticipate next year it'll be less than it was this year as these things filter through the life cycle. Let's see. Let's pop to the charts because that gets into the more granular detail. Overall, we're good with budget, our revenues and expenditures. This is the expenditure side. And again, these charts that you see are just a summary of this matrix on page 126, all the different areas. And that's just a summary there. All right, property tax, we've talked about that. We have levied about 21.4 million for this year, for this 2018 year, 21.3 million about. And so you can see that we've collected a little bit less than half of that so far. This is through September though. But the next chunk will come. We'll see it in late October, early November. But we're tracking right along. Sales tax, this is net of revenue from construction. And sales tax in the general fund portion, we've seen increases in services and auto and retail. And they are up significantly over previous years, over previous year. The highest being the services at about 242,000, and then autos about 211,000, followed by retail at about 105,000. And this is year to date. And this trend is continuing that we've seen in October and November also. So sales tax, non-construction are doing well, and that's really helping us out. I think they're up about 600,000 in the general fund over last year, actual. And this is the sales tax on construction. You can see that we budgeted conservatively here. However, you can see the dotted line is what was received last year through September, and you see that we've received a bit less than that. And that trend's going to continue into October and November. You'll see that also. I can't remember the exact amount, but it is less than last year. Utility taxes, they're working along. This is, let's see if this is, yeah, this is all utility taxes. If you want to see the detail of these on page 135, is the detail of all the different, the city interfund as well as the electric, gas, telephone, and solid waste external. Cable franchise fee. We're a little bit under budget and a little bit under last year, as you can see here, year to date. This is I think that we won't see it in the cable utility tax because what we'll show is only 2 months, the first and second quarter. This time we have a full 3 quarters this year. Last year we only had 2 quarters. But I don't know if this is a new trend that we're seeing that's going the way of telephone tax, which as we go to cell phone, and we've all heard about the cut the cord thing, and cable TV has a lot of competition out there right now. So it's too early to tell if this is going to be a sustaining trend, but it's something to think about and keep in mind. And again, this line, the reason the dotted line is so much lower, because we didn't receive our first cable utility tax on that 5% until April 30th last year. That would be for the first quarter. We accrue, so we'll get, when we did our reporting for 2017, we got the full 4 quarters. So we're seeing fourth quarter 2017 in our first quarter 2018. This is cash.
Sounds so nice.
Just look at the cable utility. We just looked at that. I went the wrong way. Sorry, there we go. Business licenses. You know, Dr. Tate, I don't think we increased the business taxes last year. We've increased them for 2019.
That's correct. They're the same as they were. They'll go up next year.
So I think this is a timing thing again, because if you look over at the chart next to it, you can see that 2017 year-to-date were much lower than the 2017 total year, where it was less than the 2016. So I think what we're seeing here is some of those 2017 business licenses were paid early in 2018.
Councilmember Wells?
When we go to the new model where they start with the state to get their business license, do you think that that will add to our ability to collect?
I think that what will happen is you'll see, there are businesses in our community right now that are not licensed.
Yeah.
It's hard to know where they're at. You know, we do pick those up through enforcement action and permitting at times, but one thing that is understood in the business community is they need to obtain a general license from the state. So I do think that there will be an uptick once we move to that system because you'll have a higher compliance rate.
Thank you.
Okay, and here's kind of our sad story, the building permits. You can see that they're less than what our budget expectations were, and they are less than what was received last year. These are real cyclical in nature. There's a lot of things that impact what these will be. It has to do with lending, it has to do with demand. I think that what we saw for several years there was the pent-up demand from the recession. And now we might be starting to see a new normal. Our residential construction has ebbed off. There's not as many available parcels that have been platted and ready for construction. A lot of them have been built out.
Councilmember Largo.
When will they, the new schools, when will those building permits hit us?
So their schedule has them going with 1 to 2 schools per year over the course of a 7-year period. So we're likely to see revenues of 1 or 2 schools.
Intergovernmental revenues, they are moving along. I think, though, that we'll start to see an ebb in 2018 due to our streamlined sales tax is now being edged a bit. And what they're saying, also part of our sales tax, what they're saying is that when we receive out-of-state sales tax, they reduce our mitigation payment, which is received into this governmental revenues, and the $80,000 or $70,000 a quarter is going into sales tax. So that's one factor that's impacting this, as well as we did get a boost from marijuana. Remember, we had the discussion at the last one about if the state received more than $15 million in revenues, and they go back and give the cities their 15, something like that. So anyway, complicated formula. Let's see, what else? Oh, and also something, a shout out here to the Muckleshoot Casino. We had an increase in our cost of services, and they agreed and met those costs of services that were required for this year. Yeah.
Shout out to DUIs, too.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, yeah, well, yeah, that's true.
That's good.
Well, that's a cost. That is an impact. But they recognize it, and they're providing the revenue.
Councilmember Wales.
What are as you reflect back on the liquor excise and profits, is this a downturn from what we used to receive in relationship to when it was all sold in liquor stores?
The liquor excise tax looks like it might be a little bit less than it used to be. I'd have to go back and look, but I think that trended around maybe 340,000 a year. The profits, I think those are about the same. The state took some of the excise tax. That's what they did.
Councilmember.
Shelley, the marijuana revenue, does that go strictly to the general fund?
Yes, it does.
Could we ever allocate those funds to something else?
The council can choose to do whatever they wish and allocate general fund revenue.
Okay.
Charges for services. This is our culture and recreation is our big player in this, as well as development services. Development services are down a bit this year. Culture and recreation services are up a bit, kind of a little bit more than what we're down in development services. But the big driver here is the extra duty work with public safety. And again, this is paid out of the overtime budget, the police overtime budget, and the city then bills the hiring agencies, and they pay us, and there's a little percentage in there, so for administration on that. And here again is development service fees that we've already talked about, and you can see that they follow the permitting revenue. And culture and recreation's a bit higher, as I just mentioned. A lot of programs going on. Fines and penalties, they're up this year.
Still getting red flags down there. Looks like a centipede.
Let me see if I can focus in here on fines and penalties real quick and see what's poking out there.
Red
The
flags.
the civil penalties.
Yeah.
Let's see, 2017. Civil penalties are up, as well as civil infraction. Miscellaneous revenues. Interest is doing well, more than last year. As you know, that the feds have been stair-stepping up. There's a 75% expectation they'll step again next week. Hang on to your hats. And rents and leases are up also in this category. So interest is up about $135,000 over last year, and rents and leases are up about $110,000 over last year. So we're going to, this is through third quarter again, so we'll surpass last year's revenue. Real estate excise tax is doing much better this year than it did last year. Again, as you can see from the graph over on the right-hand side of this, these revenues kind of go up and they go down. And with fewer home sales, I would think that maybe they would slow down and fewer fewer home sales. Refinancings are impacted by this. But there's been a few large transactions recently that are driving this. There was the big one over here off of AB Corridor. Gates, what is he? Owns a big business over there, Mohawks? Is it Mohawks? Transacted recently. Here we go. The animals. We love the animals.
Yes, Councilmember Pelosi.
So, as a board member, are you satisfied, Shelley, that they're doing everything they can to increase pet sales?
I think that they're being proactive, and I think they're doing a lot more than the city did when the city had it. Whether it's going to pan out to be enough to offset the costs, you know, we can, if we bring it in-house, and we never really had a person dedicated to it, and it takes a lot of time and effort. But I think that, again, they really didn't get going until about March of this year, because the other vendor, Pet Data, would not release early. They said, nope, we're keeping it to the last day. We had to give them 90 days notice, and we did, and they held on to it to the last hour.
So we should see improvement next year.
We should, and
Good.
they have a lot of programs. They've got a little thing in the veterinary clinics now that if you sell so many licenses, you get like a $10 Starbucks card. So there's a little competition has started in the clinics, and there's this organic growth. They're getting interest out there, but pet licensing is something that takes constant reminders, and you have to be out there all the time in front of people. It just doesn't organically grow on its own. You have to be out there advertising, pushing, promoting. It's just how it is.
Councilmember Pelosi.
Does the Valley Humane Society, do they send out notices to pet owners?
Yes, I just got Sherman's.
I mean, I've got a neighbor, click. I have a neighbor, she's got 2 cats.
Well, do they know? If they don't know and don't have the name and address, then,
Well, my wife keeps talking to her.
see? Yeah, well, keep
It's not-
chatting it up.
It's not fair to us who have our opinion.
We're fully licensed at my house,
Yeah.
250 pounds of us.
I don't know if John's got his dog licensed or
I don't, because I don't have a dog. But I know your cat is licensed. And
Yeah.
it's an indoor cat.
not. That's right.
So kudos to you and Joyce.
Is it chipped?
Yes.
So
There you go. That's
so
responsible.
Sherman and
And
Wilson.
neutered.
That's right.
And back to the agenda.
All right, so in their contract, they were to increase license sales 18% year over year, each year, or a total of 36% over the 2 years they have it. They're not going to, they've acknowledged that they're not going to hit the 18% this year, but they think that they will make up that ground next year and sell more than 18%.
Good.
So we need to see this year over year, have to keep having this growth. It doesn't, I guess the license revenue doesn't offset the cost of the city doing everything until about having them do the contracting for 4 or 5 years down the road. But if we get that growth year over year and just get that base up, then it will. But it's going to take a few years to get there. So we'll see. Fund 102, our arterial street fund. They're on the budget prediction for the year. Although you may see some slowing down as we've talked about the strike and some other things that have happened that have slowed these projects down. But they're right on track, spending-wise anyway. And the city street, the local street fund, you can see that they're on their budget prediction. But again, all these street funds were impacted by the strike. And then finally, the arterial street preservation. These contracts council approved for the preservation programs back in June. However, this was really impacted by the strike. And so as they catch up and get the work done, and we, you know, there are some material overruns also. You can see that it's really starting to spike back up there towards September. And when we look at fourth quarter, it'll probably be. And this is just an informational chart to show the water sold versus water sales. The lines pretty much follow each other, but it's a good way to compare year to year what's going on. And as we go to monthly sales, this may smooth out a bit. We're reading the meters for consumption every month, and then we're billing for that consumption every month. I would expect to see a lot of smoothing in these graphs. And then we always love to look at our waste streams here in the city. And the residential customers, they get the gold star. They have a 49% diversion rate. Whereas our non-single family, they don't get the gold star. They're not, multifamily is tough. It's continually working with the property managers out there to promote the recycling.
Councilmember Wales?
One of the things that I notice as I drive around, of course, I do notice Councilmember Pelosi's garbage can is this big, but most of the residents manage to, single family, kind of keep it in the one container. And if you drive by the multifamily ones, I don't know if they've got big enough ones to accommodate some of their loads.
Yeah.
And so it ends up kind of, you know, put it wherever you can to make sure that it eventually gets hauled away. And I don't know how we deal with that issue.
Well, we go out, Joan goes out, and so does Waste Management. They go out and they work with the property managers. And a lot of times property managers are hesitant to get larger recycling. And then it's a constant education with the, you know, a lot of people in apartments or multifamily, there's a large portion that are transient. They're in and out. You know, they're here for a short period of time, and it's hard to get a stable understanding of our recycling program.
We should send Bill out to be a trainer of trainers.
This is just tonnage by customer type. You can see commercial is by far the largest. Looks like we need to go talk to our commercial people. And then our cemetery, I'll have to ask them to use green for the revenue line here, because red is contradictory. So should have them use a green line for revenue and maybe a red line for expenditure. But they're doing well, which is kind of a love-hate thing, you know.
Councilmember Holman, do you have something to say?
Oh, it's a turnaround from the cemetery from 4 years ago, 5 years ago, when
Yeah.
Margot and I were on finance back then.
Yeah, Director Faber made some changes and allocations from lot sales and put more of it towards operations, which we needed to do.
It shows.
Yeah, had to be done. And then our purchase order and P-card transaction, as you see, we're still reducing our P card or our purchase order and doing the P cards, which are more efficient, less time consuming than cutting purchase orders. A lot of cities that haven't gone to P cards are going that route now. You get the incentives here.
Mr. Brown?
Yes, sir.
Accountability. Are you finding sufficient accountability with the P cards?
Yes.
Good.
Maybe even more so.
I would think so.
They go through the same review process that a purchase order goes through, but people, I think that when we had accounts at Lowe's and AgriShop and a lot of other, and the crews are going in there and they're buying stuff and they get all the little papers and take them back, and the administrators in the department were sifting through these and waiting for the statement to come and match up all the invoices. Now, they can go out every day, look at that P card, see what's been purchased, and say, hey, where's the paperwork? And so it's online real time. We don't have to wait for them to come in. I think it's worked out.
There's nothing like budgets and finance to drive what audience we have away.
It's all good news. This is riveting stuff. Okay. I do want to, again, on page 162 is the sales tax that we talked about. There are the operating cash flow statements for our utility funds. They're all doing good. And there's also our investment returns. We're not hitting the 6-month T-bill return rate, but we're getting close. And it's hard to catch a 6-month T-bill in a rapidly rising rate environment. But we're getting there.
Anybody have any questions? Yes.
Am I reading this chart right, that our return on investment is almost 2.25%?
That, it's I think 2.02%.
2.02.
Blended Auburn rate is 2.02 and the current 6-month rate is 2.34. But we are now up at 2.34 in the state pool, just in a matter of 2 months. This was at the end of September. I looked at the November report. We're up at 2.3 something right now as a return to state pool. That's how quickly these things are moving. And I don't know what the 6-month rate is, but you probably, if you've been listening to the news, have heard that we're getting pretty skinny on our 2-year to 10-year bond rate. We're down to 11 basis points spread. We need to be watching to see if that inverts. And they generally follow, they're not usually, I've heard some economists say within a couple of months, but the last 3, it took like almost over a year for us to go into recession, so. Let's see.
Then I guess I will turn this back over to Deputy Mayor.
Good job, Shelley.
Thank you, Councilmember Brown. Well, we're going to deal with just a few items left on the matrix, most of which are moving into next year. Councilmember Trot-Manuel, do we have a date or any anticipation for when we might address investment?
No, I thought that our attorney, Steve, was going to be handling domestic violence.
Well, no. I'm going to be working with the police department to give you a status report on what the police department and the prosecutor's office are currently doing. That's a little bit separate from, I mean, that would be the advocacy report part of it, so maybe we'll just add that on there. Heyman will be dealing with the domestic violence advocacy piece of it. We'll give you the status of what the police.
Okay, because I have not talked to Dana about this, so that was kind of news to me when I saw this. So yes, that would be great.
So I believe what's on here is when you asked police at the last study session about information on domestic violence.
Right.
That's why it's on here. It was your request.
Yeah, but I didn't know that it was Dana's, I thought it was our attorney and our police officers that were going to do this.
It is.
Okay,
We need to update the matrix there.
yeah, okay. All right, thank you.
So do we
So I'll
have
get a date. I
So
haven't
we're still
spoken.
TBD then?
Yeah, so I'll get with them and I'll set up a date. I'll let you know.
Councilmember Holman?
Yes, on identity theft, City Attorney Gross has met with us individually or in small, non-quorum groups. Has anyone been left out of that talk on identity theft?
Still wants to chat with you about it.
Because we can remove it from the matrix if we've all had one-on-ones or two-on-ones with the city attorney and the city prosecutor on the subject of identity theft.
You don't want it on January 14th?
Well, there is one more thing left, and that is the discussion on whether we wish to make a gross misdemeanor out of identity theft in the city of Auburn. That still has to be handled, and that's as good a date to discuss it in
Bring ordinance back to study session.
that study session.
Okay. Councilmember Paul.
In my session with the city attorney, I had asked for some data
We'll get back to you on that.
so that I can feel comfortable with the way we're going.
Was there a particular item that you had?
No, under the identity.
Oh, the identity theft. Okay, I'm with you.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Are there any other new items? Yes.
Not a new item, just a comment on item number 2, the plastic bag ban. Just as a point of information, the state legislature is going to be taking this up at their next legislative session. So they're looking at a potential statewide plastic ban, charging for the use of reusable bags. So not sure where it's going to go, but it's going to be up for discussion. But we still need to discuss it here, but just be aware it's going to come up in the legislative session in 2019.
Could drift over into some major decision later on.
It could, yeah.
Election. Okay. Any other items to be added to the matrix?